Well, welcome everyone. Welcome to another installment of City Lights Live, the virtual component of the City Lights events calendar. I'm your host, Peter Maravellis, and tonight, City Lights and Coffee House Press are pleased to be able to celebrate the publication of a new edition of Fog and Car by Eugene Lim. Long out of print, this compelling and much sought after debut novel returns to the City Lights shelves with a new introduction from Renee Gladman. We are delighted to have Eugene Lim here with us tonight. He's going to be joined in conversation by Ian Dreiblatt. A note before we begin, as always, we'd like to acknowledge that we are beaming to you from the unceded ancestral homelands of the Ohlone people, aka the San Francisco Bay Area. A moment of respect for those who have come before us as stewards of the land. Eugene Lim is the author of the novels The Strangers, published by Black Square Editions, Dear Cyborgs, an FSG original, and Search History from Coffee House Press. His writings have appeared in the Brooklyn Rail, The Baffler, Dazed, Fence, amongst others. He is a high school librarian and runs Ellipsis Press and makes his home in Queens, New York. Very, very delighted to have him back in the house after many, many years. Also with us tonight is Ian Dreiblatt, who is a writer, translator, and musician, formerly the TV commercials correspondent for The Believer. He is most recently the author of the poetry collection Forget Thee, published by Ugly Duckling Press, and the translator of Dimitri Furman's Imitation Democracy, published by Verso Books. Mr. Dreiblatt's work has appeared in the Agriculture Reader, Palast, the Boog City Portable Reader, amongst other outlets. Makes his home in Brooklyn, New York. So join us in offering a warm welcome to Eugene Lim and Ian Dreiblatt. Such a pleasure to have both of you with us here tonight. Welcome to City Lights.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Peter.
Hey, thank you so much. So delighted to be here, and so very delighted to be under the auspices of the legendary City Lights books and with the ever more legendary Eugene Lim. So I think what we're going to do, if this better sound good because there's no way to communicate if it doesn't. I'm going to read just a little intro to some of Eugene's work, and then I think Eugene is going to favor us with a few short excerpts from the book, and then we'll have a little conversation, and then we'll open it up, and would love to hear your questions. So I wanted to offer a few introductory thoughts on Eugene Lim as an educator, publisher, and writer. Eugene has long worked at New York City's Hunter College High School, and while I've never really heard him connect that day job to his practice as a writer, I have heard a seemingly ever-increasing number of intellectually impressive alumni speak warmly of the guy they call Mr. Lim, including a number of people whose names I will not drop, but if you wander around New York City, you will find them and they will speak so wonderfully of him. While I'm not really in a position to say these folks' achievements stem uniformly from experiences in their high school library, I do feel I can say that Eugene possesses a breadth and generosity of mind that few who meet him manage to miss. A little closer to what brings us here tonight is Eugene's work as the founder, editor, publisher, bartender, spiritual advisor, and sole proprietor of Ellipsis Press, a jagged and magnificent operation that has published about 15 books over the past 17 years or so, all of them gloriously impervious to the dictates of profitability and critical consensus. I think of titles like Jeremy Davies' Fancy, Karen Anhui Lee's Love Chronicles of the Octopodes, Donald Breckenridge's As It Falls, and Alan Davies' Odes and Fragments, which have wildly enriched the little pockets of reality in which they are reverently and impossibly read. In a world where small presses struggle and micro presses fizzle, Ellipsis has proved astonishingly constant, a sure testament to some kind of something right that is being done. And it is Ellipsis's first publication that brings us here tonight. Eugene Lim's debut novel, Fog and Car, published, I believe, in 2007. Is that right, originally?
I think 2008 it came out.
I am sorry. Okay, 2008. No. Crackling with Borgesian and Oulipian sympathies, it is an arresting book, which I think is slyly also an intricately articulated theory of the novel and a kind of long cascading joke that's too funny to be laughed at. It was followed in 2013 by The Strangers from Black Square Editions, in 2017 by Dear Cyborgs from FSG, and in 2021 by Search History from Coffee House Press. While these books are pretty diverse, there are a few things that powerfully unite them. a deep concern with the bundle of historical contingencies we tend to call the novel, searching questions about what it is to be someone and whether anyone actually manages to do that, an ironized outrage at the political conditions under which we live, love, and work, and hardly least of all, a high-wire act of form and style that synthesizes a truly wild experimentation to see what the novel may be capable of, with a very old-fashioned, pleasurable kind of eloquence, an athleticism of phrasing that carries us, superhero style, over buildings of any height, with unfussy grace, awake to the bemusements of our civilizational evening. It's an uncanny heist that no one but Eugene could pull off, and to me at least, it recalls no writer more strongly than his one-time teacher, Gilbert Sorrentino. As he has continued his output, Eugene has been celebrated, I almost want to say pelted, with admirations and appreciations. Recently, Jonathan Lethem, writing in the New York Times, declared Dear Cyborgs one of the 10 best novels of the 21st century. A few years earlier in the same publication, Eileen Miles named it one of their favorite New York City novels ever written. Search History received a publicist's ransom in unrestrained praise from publications like The New Yorker and The Washington Post, among numerous others. And yet, for all the rightful commotion over Eugene's brilliance, his somewhat modestly published debut novel had gone the way of all ink. It was long out of print. Until now. Because last month, literary humanity finally got its shit together in the form of Wise Action by Coffee House Press, who have re-released Fog and Car in a beautiful new edition that you should definitely buy, with a lovely introduction by the great Renee Gladman. Reading through the book, Gladman writes, I feel a strong longing for things to stop moving entirely. What is a novel of nothing, of open, of clear? This is not that novel, but it is made of what would beckon it, emptying as it floods and flooding as it empties. I am exceptionally honored to be here tonight and grateful for the opportunity to join you in celebrating this extraordinary book and the weird, lovely person who wrote it, my buddy, the absolutely wonderful Eugene Lim. So you're clapping in your homes, I know. Can't hear it over the internet, so I'm going to keep going. Oh, somebody's clapping visually, and I love that. As a first order of business, I believe Eugene is going to favor us with a couple of excerpts from the book.
Sure. Thank you, Ian. That was really nice. That was very nice. Okay, so Fog and Car is a book about two main characters who just have had a divorce, and they're big open kind of symbols at the beginning. So I will read a little bit from both their points of view. The first is from Jim Fogg's about Jim Fogg, but in the beginning of the book, there really are bigger symbols, and he's just Mr. Fogg at this point. And all we really need to know is that when we meet Mr. Fogg, he's lost, he's just cleaned his house, and he's going for a walk. That's pretty much the plot of what I'm about to read to you. He grabs clothes quickly. He may still fall to it willingly, not helpless. Even now, he knows a destination, a literalization of an abstraction of a pulp plot made literal, wherein he will, quote, solve his, quote, problem. The things were changing color and shape. The problems were rearranging to account for the air now outside his house. Did he really carry his problems this way, like some various organisms in a petri dish, microscopic yet infinitely complex, reacting to light and action stimuli so that they reshaped and chameleoned to however he could look at them, containing multiple and overlapping properties which, like the fable of the equation, grew or shrunk by his observation in certainty and uncertainty. Walking, he continues over some more dirt roads, cuts through someone's lawn, now at the wood's edge. The short time at the lake was to gather his thoughts, he thinks, before he rushed into it. The speed was something he was contriving, allowing his deeper levels to prepare the trick for himself to witness, be surprised at. Various trees covered the steep descent to the creek. He started down, soon fast and then faster. Gravity was helping him down, pushing him, actually, so that he was taking larger and larger uncontrolled steps, now beginning to fall, his legs staggering, barely in time to keep him upright. He remembered games at night, played in a pine wood, hunt and prey games where you crouched behind tree shadows and then sprinted through the woods over a floor of needles, silent and swift, with your arms in front of face, for always the fear of being clotheslined or battered by a low-hanging branch. So that now he's doing the same, struggling to keep his legs below him and his feet crashing through the kindling twigs below, but with his hands up, pushing through the small branches that whipped at his upper body, unable to avoid them and hoping no force awaits greater than his own gravity to stop him with a sickening crack. He is wondering how long could this possibly sustain, this gauntlet of branches and this vertical feet to ground but airy falling, when he sees the narrow clearing ahead where the creek is. His mind switches instantly to wondering how long it will last, to wondering if he will be able to stop in time. It is a shallow creek with a rocky, loose bottom, and if he doesn't regain control, he sees himself finally falling, really falling in his abrupt entrance into the creek. His feet will splash, making the water opaque enough not to see the relief of the rocks below, and unbalanced, he will fall hard and finally horizontal into the water. But the incline gentles at its bottom, and though the ground of loose dirts and twigs slips beneath him, he tries to make his steps smaller and smaller, more control with each touch to the ground, so he finally stops, one sneaker dry on the bank and the other sunk in water. He wades through it to the other side. The other side of the creek is an even steeper slope, a craggy rise directly up, so that he realizes in a way he never had as a child that the creek must have once been a true river, cutting away this valley, mellowing in time, or perhaps wounded upriver by damming as the town grew. There is a way up the other side, he knows, an indentation of stone steps into the rise a half-mile to his right. But he wants to be at the top this way, so finds a nook with his now muddied tennis shoe. It's a true climb of about 4 stories. He puts a hand into another small jutting, knowing he is weary already and unsure if he can actually do it. There are crevices and footholds that make the first 5 or 6 feet seem possible. This is maybe what makes him do it. The beginning of the climb is understandable, foreseeable, and he knows what his first several moves will be. He has them already envisioned when he reaches up and pulls himself off the ground, beginning. The next steps happen easily enough, like a cat up a tree. He briefly notes that he hasn't seen anyone since he's left the house, that he lives alone, that it is a short but formidable uphill climb back out of the woods, that if he fell and was hurt in any way, no one would look for him until he was missed at work. Notes this briefly. He is now past the point of his initial envisioning. His weight is on his left foot, and he is scanning upward generally, left and right, for the next handhold. It feels much steeper than when he had begun. He is not yet scared because he knows if he must, he could reverse the steps, retreat back down. Then a small swing onto a short ledge and a few quick, easier steps up. He is about 9 feet up now and pauses as he can't see where to put his right foot. Now he knows he cannot go back down, and that some foothold or crevice back in the immediate past functioned as a valve, allowing him through but not allowing him back again. Fear stays held back for a few moments longer. He is resting on one foot, the other not quite placeable anywhere, the slope enough so that he can lean his body into it with some comfort and stability. He measures that there is an equal distance up as there is down. He decides to continue and once again looks up, sees another handhold, and reaches across his body to hold firmly onto this jutting, so that his weight now is balanced on 2 separate parts of the cliff, half on one foot and half on this other hand from which he is hanging. So we'll leave Mr. Fogg there for the moment. And then there's 2 main characters. There's Jim Fogg, who is, and Sarah Carr. These 2 are kind of open symbols who are, they start especially as open symbols, and they get transformed into more character-like characters as the book progresses. But Jim Fogg is kind of lost in a fog of memory, and Sarah Carr is a bit more driven and goal-oriented, but perhaps on a treadmill and not really going anywhere. But here's Sarah Carr. And all we need to know about Sarah right now is that it's summertime and she is lost and she's in her apartment. What Sarah Carr could say, she did, however little that was. She wanted to make an effort, at least that. Out the window, she could see the heat solid in the air, and later would be out directly in it. Summer threatened her with ending by beginning, and she felt her inefficiency up to then was an increasing liability, but thinking so, she found, did not change things. The square of her window, cut again into four, showed straight into an inscrutable whiteness. So she stood up, looked instead onto the street, which, peopled, allowed her to flatter her powers of understanding. She was about to go out into it, but didn't. She kept looking around for something, felt sweat accumulating, and went to open the window. Traveling, that would ease this mind lock, or keep changing the view from the window so that it would seem. That was it always, she understood. And the feeling of the trap which she had been born into and which age had only allowed her to perceive was but one context which she used. She got a glass from the cupboard and filled it with ice and water. It stood on the table in front of her, a cylindrical mimic of the window, sweating. She placed it against her closed eye, first one, then the other. She cleaned the glass of its condensation and peered through it to her distended world. As she put it down, she listened to her environment become static, and she involuntarily lifted her shoulder to wipe sweat from the side of her neck. Searching for some release, she moved the glass of ice water to the edge of the table. For a moment, the potential for crashing it to the floor held her wrapped. She had not opened the window, though she remembered she had moved toward it to do so. She approached it again, and in so doing, knocked the glass over onto the table. She watched the water slipping to the sides of the table, curve down its edge, then drip to the floor. Seeing the ice cube gently skid a short path, she thinks of bobbing for apples. She puts her hands behind her back and, without thought, judges her height to position herself. She leans over the table, mouth agape, and aims for the ice cube, which, frictionless, pops from her lips and skitters away. She nudges it with her nose to a more central position, its volume diminishing, on her nose skin a single bead as legacy. She goes for it again, small enough now to be subjected to the vacuum of her mouth. Then, in the trap of her teeth, the sound of a single crunch, a testament to victory, but so small, but one crunch sound. From the freezer, a complete new cube is brought to the table. As Sarah positions herself, she realizes she has never questioned the dimensional lie in, quote, cube. And but what right would she thinks on her way down, and when her mouth touches the ice, the proposition is forgotten forever. The previous attempt had taught her caution and hypotheses of position, which testing she proved successful, but not without a satisfying difficulty. The ice cube is in her mouth. Not one, nor even two, but three solid crunches of the primary variety, followed by the numberless fade out of secondaries. She sat down, the cold painful to her gums. The window still was closed, and the coolness in her throat was soon gone. Around her, the heat oppressed. Something stopped her from going to the window yet a third time. All that was done was a looking up, again through the window, to the sun, which now, in a position of her sight, sanded the sky to a hard color. The room was filled with it, and as her eyes scanned the details shown, all seemed, by their retreating shadows, prostrate to the heat. The refrigerator within distance, she stretched her leg out and nudged open the door. The cold sank to her naked foot, and the food gave off a numbed smell that neither countered nor increased her appetite. She closed the door, retracted her leg, and then for several moments did not move at all. She felt, if she willed it, the company of her surroundings. By not seeing, feeling, or hearing them, it would leave her, and she would find an utterly complete solitude. She brought a hand from her lap and patted the water left on the table. The night previous, she had gone to a bar. She had gotten drunk without conversation, gotten home without incident, and yet still woke embarrassed. She sat for a long time more, and the only thought that dully repeated was to pour herself yet another glass of ice water. Thanks.
Thanks, Eugene. I love that. So I have some questions in mind, but I think to start with, not to put you on the spot, but I wonder if you would say a little bit about why you selected those two excerpts to share, because I imagine that doing that will also be an opportunity to share a little bit of your thinking about the book.
Yeah, well, I wanted to give you a little flavor of both characters. They actually, but both characters kind of transform throughout the book. So um, you just get a little taste of them from that. And they're actually their styles keep shifting throughout the book. So it was hard to pick a short thing that was complete for both of them. So that was one reason. The other reason is it's always fun to end a portion on a literal cliffhanger. And the other was it's summer, and it's today was a very lovely late summer, early fall kind of day. But the line that Sarah thinks, or that I wrote for Sarah Carr, which is summer uh, threatened threatened to end by beginning, or something like that. I think of each summer, and that was one reason. Just it seemed seasonally appropriate.
I love that. Thank you. Yeah, it's a little like an ice cube escaping us, I think, the way the characters change. Okay, so here's a really sort of very general question, but I'm just wondering, so this is 4 books ago, right? And your 5th, I hope I'm not spilling any secret beans, I believe is on the way. So how does it feel to be revisiting your kind of earliest published work at this stage in your career?
Yeah, it's I just want to stop for a moment and just say thank you, Ian. That was a great introduction. And it's so fun to be in this virtual space together with you. And thanks to City Lights, and thanks for everyone for showing up for this. It's very weird to revisit this book. This book was published in 2008, but I was looking for a publisher for a while, and I didn't finish. I finished the book even earlier. I finished it in 2001, in the summer of 2001. The summer is before 9/11, before the world kind of changes in several different ways. So to revisit it is very strange. I'm proud of it, and I am a little scared just because I'm not sure how it holds up, but I hope that it does, and I am proud of it. But it's weird to talk about. I've done a few events, and it is strange to talk about because I don't really feel like the writer. It's been over 20 years since I wrote this work, so I don't exactly feel like the same writer who wrote the work, but I will pretend to be that person today, and I will and try to represent or try to think about how I was thinking when I wrote this over 23 years ago.
So I mean, I imagine that temporal distance makes that feeling more extreme, but do you feel like the writer of your most recent work, or are you always
I feel
more?
much closer to it. There's also that I think I started putting more directly autobiographical elements in some of the fiction, some of the more recent fiction. So and that there was a big. I think that there's a change between Fog and Car and The Strangers, and what caused that change, who knows? But it moves more towards a monologue and storytelling kind of structure, which I've kind of kept for the books after that. But for this one, it was its concerns were not really in the same way about storytelling and monologue. It was more about style and similar ideas in terms of playing with the momentum of different styles, but this was a predecessor to that. And so in that sense, there's also a distance, or there's the concerns are a little bit different than they are now.
Yeah, it's a to me it's a big shift. I mean, as a fan of your work, I feel like excited for more people who are familiar with the second, third, and fourth book, which all are quite different, but have certain kind of formal things in common, to encounter you working in this pretty different mode, like you're saying, which is less these sort of rotating monologues.
Yeah, they were, yeah, the I don't know if I have much more to add to that, but there was it does seem like a big jump, but there is a thinking about instead of character and plot being the center, there's a little bit of thinking about how does style affect a chapter or style affect a passage. And I think that style in that Fog and Car is a question of like momentum and a question of like of momentum. But in the later books, it becomes more about genre often. So there's a shift there. And the other big shift that I've mentioned that I've thought about is that this book Fog and Car is a little bit before the internet, and I think the arrival of the internet makes a big difference for the world, but makes a big difference for those subsequent books. And in this novel, Fog and Car, none of the people have cell phones. People are not participating in the digital world in the same way that we take for granted, or that transformation is nascent, has barely happened in the world of Fog and Car. So that's another big shift.
That's interesting. So I didn't actually realize that you had finished writing it in 2001. That is that's a while ago.
Yeah.
I guess what the question I'm trying to formulate is what the cell phone thing is an interesting point. How do you feel like it's wrapped up in kind of thinking and reading you were doing in the 90s and very early zeros, or is it more of a mysterious cloud of who knows what comes out and goes in? Or
if the choice is between those two, I think I'm going to choose Mysterious Cloud. But it's there's a lot of there were some well, I'll put it this way. There are the big change between the analog and digital world, I think, happened. And I think that's why the fragmented monologues of the subsequent novels is possible, because the internet has changed our idea of narrative. We move through so many different kinds of narratives so much more quickly, I think, these days. And that, I think, affected literature and affected certainly the next few novels. And there were, I think I was thinking about not genre as much, and maybe more the influences were sometimes more from poetry or from poets' novels. Like Robert Creeley's prose was definitely a big influence, and William Carlos Williams's prose was actually quite a big influence. I think it was because those were the writers I had studied, in school, but also after school. I was influenced by Gilbert Sorrentino, like you had mentioned, who introduced me to some of those writers. And I fell in love, I think, with poets' prose. And I think poets' prose influence a lot of, especially the first third of Fog and Car.
That's interesting. And when I think about you as a writer, I definitely think about you as way more with a foot sunk way deeper into the mud of poetry than the average novelist, which came out in a weird way, but I meant as a compliment. That you're engaged with poetry and care about poetry and knowledgeable about poetry, which I think isn't always true for the like straight because I think you have really published only fiction, right? Or only prose.
Yeah, for the great most part, that is true. And I think I have a love of poetry, and but I don't know if I'm particularly knowledgeable at it, and certainly not knowledgeable about current poets. But I actually think that they're two distinct kind of writing modes. Creeley actually said, when asked what's the difference, he said something like, well, it's all a composite of language, or all compact of words, I think he said. And while that's true, and he could do both modes, I do think that there's a almost two distinct kind of minds, a mind of that can write poetry and a mind that can write prose or fiction. But poets are fun to party with. And so I love poets for all kinds of reasons. And I do love poets' prose, and I think it comes out often very weird, and the concerns are very different, and they're less concerned with momentum, actually, often. and with getting plots going, but they are concerned with foregrounding language, which makes sense.
Well, and
So
the book, the two, unless I'm remembering, the two epigraphs to the book are from Williams and Creeley, both writing in prose, right?
that's right. Yes, that's right.
So I bet I didn't mean to cut you off.
I don't know what I was going to say, but Creeley's The Island is his early novel, and yeah, that was a big influence. And Williams has all kinds of strange, weird prose works that New Directions used to collect in a book called Imaginations. Maybe it still does, but it has The Great American Novel and Spring and All, and a few and works like that that are bizarre experimental fiction. And then he writes the kind of more realist novels that are related to Flossie, or are kind of fictionalized versions of a biography of his wife. But these earlier novels are really weird and strange, and are a poet letting loose in prose and searching for a form and trying to figure out what a prose form would be. So that was, to me, exciting and kind of it was exciting to see that experimentation early on in American literature, actually, in prose. So there's that.
That's interesting. It's also interesting to me to think about triangulate this with Sorrentino, who I adore, but also think of as one of the rare predominantly prose writers who was actually a great poet when he wrote poetry too. Like his poetry is terrific. But I'm interested in what you said about foregrounding poets' novels tending to foreground language. You use language in a way that often foregrounds this. I think if I remember right, in the passage you just shared with us, you use gentle as a verb, which is pretty groovy. Are you making a face like I got that wrong? But I thought you did.
I don't know. I was trying to remember. I think
Well,
when fog is falling, he gentles his step. Maybe, I don't know. I don't remember.
strike
But
what I said, doesn't matter. But I wonder if you would talk a little bit about your view of character, because this is certainly a book driven by two characters, and then these characters, as you point out, are not really stable entities, neither on a stylistic nor on a kind of a characterological narrative level. And so in particular, because I feel that it treats character a little bit differently from your other work, but also just because it's interesting. I wonder if you talk a little bit about how you see these characters in relation to actual human beings as they sort of exist in the world, if we believe that they do.
I think I became more radical about, or I had a more extreme uh, theory or idea of character in the subsequent novels, wherein a writer that we both love, Harry Matthews, has a line that I always like, which is, or I always quote, which is that all you need for a character is a name and a haircut. I forget if it's haircut or hair color, but and it makes you realize that a character in literature, a character in a novel, is a funny technology, where where a bunch of ideation gets tagged as a particular point of view, but it's so there's a certain artificiality, or there's a certain construction of it that makes it that it's an illusion of a person, but it actually is a kind of technique or a kind of technology. In Fog and Car, I think that idea is there, but it's kind of in its nascent form, or if in an early form, because the characters do the idea of these two characters, Jim Fogg and Sarah Carr, transform throughout the course of the novel. At first, they are kind of these open symbols, Miss Carr and Mr. Fogg, and then they become Jim Fogg and Sarah Carr, and then they become Jim and Sarah. And the big open symbols slowly kind of coalesce into more character-like characters. And I think that was a purposeful treatment, exploring, I think, not really in command, but just kind of exploring an idea of what it means to be a symbol, what it means to be allegorical, and what it means to be a character. And that all of that is I think happens in Fog and Car, and kind of shifts from one extreme to the other through the course of the book. I think you muted yourself. Oh, I see. Maybe I don't know how to unmute you. Okay, there you go.
I just wanted to drink some water quietly and didn't realize the Zoom settings wouldn't let me unmute. So
That's
I was messaging City Lights there. But thank you. Okay, so another character, another slippery character I wanted to ask you about is Frank Exit, who plays an important role in this book, but who comes up in maybe all of your books, or certainly others of your books. Um, who is and also I have seen that name come up around you in other contexts, and I wonder if you would talk a little bit about who Frank is and how you met him.
Mm. Frank Exit is an interesting character who was born in Fognkar, and I think I like using him over and over and over again because he's a big, empty, open cipher. There are things I can say particularly that I feel about him, but in Fognkar, how he works is there are these big open symbols. There's Jim Fogg and Sarah Carr, and there needed to be a reason for them to kind of come together, or for the plot to make its transformation. And the way they did it, the way that happens is via this third character, Frank Exit. So he provides, in a way, an exit from this static situation, or a way to make the slow static or slow moving novel suddenly go into, kick into gear. And so for me, he was an important catalyst. He was an important kind of third element that bursts the dichotomy of Jim Fogg and Sarah Carr. And then he appeared again in subsequent novels, not always as the same Frank Exit, but perhaps another Frank Exit, or maybe he's not even the same Frank Exit throughout a book, as this idea of character and exploring it, and maybe emptying it, or subverting it, becomes more we work on that idea a little bit more throughout subsequent novels. But I like the idea of revisiting character names and having the characters be similar but not precisely, or sometimes wildly different from previous incarnations, because I get to use the word incarnation to talk about a character, for one, but also because it's like a fictitious world like Faulkner would build, a Yoknapatawpha County, but it's weirder because it's not stable, and that seems an interesting thing that has developed also.
Really interesting. So I'm thinking a little bit about this kind of instability of character, if that's a word I can use, or unfixedness of the identity of these characters throughout the writing. And I'm thinking something I know about you is also that you have a long-standing kind of engagement with Zen Buddhism, which I think talks about, I am no expert, but I believe it talks about like sort of non-duality and the elusiveness of self. And I wonder if there's a connection there, if those things feel related to you, or if I'm just barking up trees, or
No, I think you're barking up the right tree. It's in The Strangers, the book after this, I think that becomes it's a little bit more explicitly said, or explicitly thought about. And I think the idea of identity, the idea of identity in Buddhism is that it doesn't exist, that there is no self, because after the quick explanation might be that after you explore and think, what is the self, or what am I? You realize that there is no independent existing thing that is the self, that it is interdependent, if we use Thich Nhat Hanh's language, or it's contingent is another way you could say it, on so many things that you can't, it's very difficult to draw a line of identity between self and non-self. And that's a Zen idea, that's a Buddhist idea. And I think you can apply it to character, but it's all, the devil's in the details. Like, what does that mean when you empty out the idea of self? And it's also true that even though there is no self, if you slap the self, it still hurts. So the self is still a something that we use, or the concept is still functional. but fundamentally, the Buddhist argument goes, it has no abiding, independent nature. And I think that that gives a lot of leeway, or a lot of kind of, it maybe does present a lens which a writer can use to think about, subvert ideas of what a character is or what personhood is. And in this latest novel that I'm finishing up, I think that comes into play when we think of how AI is inventing personalities, or what it would mean for an intelligence to have a self, or be a character, to have a personality. And so constructions of identity are happening, are happening in the world. Fiction writers have done it forever. And AI in the machine world is starting to try to do it. And what does that mean? These ideas that were born in Fog and Car and are working through the novels now have this kind of technological policy question too to think about, and is wrestling with in the books.
Oh, that's interesting. I was interested in what you said also about the relationship between character as a fictional thing and personhood as whatever word, philosophical or social, whatever word we want to use. Clearly they're not the same thing, and I feel like your work plays a lot on the tension between them as connected, differentiable forms. Does that feel right? Like, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that they're very similar words, and I think that that the I wrote an essay about we could replace the idea in fiction of character with this bigger idea of personhood, and mostly because I think character has been used in such a way that it implies we're trying to represent a sentient, person, and personhood, I think, shows how shows that what you have is not really a person, but you have this gesture towards a independent being, or outlined and self-contained mind. But really, just like we were talking about in the Buddhist sense, it's just kind of a collection of bits, right? And how is that made? And so the language, I think, it's kind of on a spectrum. But the idea is, with the use of personhood over character, I think, is to point towards the idea that character, just like identity, is something that is constructed. And let's look at how that can be constructed. And maybe it can be constructed in all kinds of interesting and different ways, and not just like, oh, there's Boris with an aquiline nose and a broad forehead, and there are different ways to kind of achieve this illusion of a person, and what are those techniques? What are those techniques, and why do they work?
Okay, so I want to flag that I'm hoping we will get some questions from this lovely Zoom audience in a minute. But so if you have a question, please be ready with it. Think about it. Put it in the chat now. Hang on to it. Want to hear it. Before we do that, I kind of wanted just to ask you also, to me, as a admirer of your work, this book really feels on one level like kind of a victory lap. I mean, I don't mean to, I don't really like that way of talking about art, but I just mean in the sense that it does seem, books disappear much, much more often than they insistently reassert themselves, and interesting books doubly so. So to me, it's great news for humanity that this book is out on paper again. And I realize this is not exactly a question, but I guess what I mean to say is, is it a bit of a party? Are you, I mean, I know you're excited. I don't mean it that way, but what I'm really trying to ask is there some feeling of this work, this early work of yours, that in some ways predates some other forms you found that you've worked in a sustained way. Is there some feeling of vindication there, or is that not a, you see what I'm asking?
Yeah, well, to some extent, I think it's I'm really glad it's back in the world, and I am proud of it. But I don't know how it'll do. But if it does well in the world, of course I'll be glad. And whether it's a vindication, I don't know. I think I just feel very lucky that it gets another day in court, so to speak. Um, I have been surprised, pleasantly surprised, that people are talking about it and reviewing it in a way that I had hoped that they would 23 years ago, that they had recognized this kind of inversion or subversion of a novel form, um, and that it does play with style in a self-reflexive way, and that it has some emotional resonance still. And I don't know if vindication is the right word, but relief, gratitude, and you know, a sense of gratitude and relief and gladness.
Yeah, I regret the word vindicated. That's a terrible word.
No.
I mean what you're saying. Thank you. Okay. I think it's like it's 5 to 7 in San Francisco and 5 to 10 in New York. I wonder if we have a couple of questions in the audience. Your rare opportunity to ask Eugene Lim a question about his work. You can put it in the chat. You can put the hand up emoji. You can just, right now it's pretty quiet. You could chime right in. Okay. Well, here we got one. What would the writer of Fog and Car think of the writer you are today? This comes from chat.
Boy, the writer from Car. Um, I I think they'd be happy. I think that they would be. What would they think? It's a good question. I don't know. I think they would be surprised. They would be like, I think I don't know if expectations were low back then, but if like, so it was, I will say this, if you're a struggling writer, it was a long time that you wrote, and you were way out in the wilderness, and you weren't getting any responses or any you weren't getting that many yeses, and you were getting a lot of rejections. So that person is I think would be very happy and grateful to see the writer today. I think I don't know. And also I don't know, be careful what you wish for. I don't know. It's I didn't expect that it would turn out this way, and it's been a strange and wild ride. I don't know. I don't know how to answer that question, but
seems like you do.
Okay, there you go. That was the answer.
Oh, and you got a smiling emoji from the asker. So I have one closing question that is admittedly kind of a softball, but is there another crowd question? Would anybody like to? Oh, we got another one from Catherine. In the acknowledgements, you wrote about the moment you finished the novel on a bright summer afternoon in 2001. How did you know you had finished your first novel?
Well, it also says in that note that I walked into the living room where my friend was couch surfing, and I told him, and at the same time, I think neither of us really believed it. And I just finished a manuscript this time recently, and I think you never really know until way after that was the moment. But I forget, maybe Ian, you said this, or someone told me this. There's a point where you go, where you change from making it to refining it, or you change, there's a moment where you finish a draft and it's done, and now you're going to polish it or work on it or tweak it. And I think I wrote the ending. I think the ending was written, and I thought, wow, well, I guess I might be done. And it's it's a funny feeling, and I think I've had moments where I thought that and I was wrong, but I think that one was correct, because I do remember that moment and thinking, well, that's weird, because it hadn't happened to me before. When you finish a thing. Sorrentino, and I go ahead, Ian. Well, Sorrentino, I've been thinking about this recently, has this line in an essay, and I was thinking about it recently, where he says something like, a writer's in a weird position when they finish a novel, because they've made themselves unemployed again. That they're in this weird, they put themselves in a moment of crisis because their big job is over, and now who are they and what do they do? And that's a strange feeling. But anyways, when that happens, it's a big day.
I was gonna say, I remember by coincidence, we had lunch the day, and you looked up and you said, I think I just finished the first draft of the new novel, but I'm not sure.
Okay.
It was very exciting. Okay, we have 2 more questions in the chat, and I think these should probably be our 2 last questions. So Michael says, how did you know it was time to change form in the different chapters of Fog and Car? What guided you in the various POV changes?
It's funny when sometimes I think Fongar is actually too schematic, but all the changes were thought out in advance. I mean, maybe I didn't do what I thought I was going to do, but I thought I had ideas about how the styles were supposed to shift each time. And I think as I was writing, of course, those evolved, but I had a general idea of how each chapter was supposed to work. Sometimes it was that because the chapter in some way was a mimicry of another writer, like a mimicry of Creeley's prose. Or there's one kind of Oulipian moment where I took a poem of Paul Blackburn's and kept the vowel sounds and made a little section, and then did that over and over again. So there are a few moments where that are Oulipian like, but it was also done. There was kind of a architectural plan in advance, and sometimes I think that it was too deterministic, and the shifts were made by plan as opposed to organically. But those 2 words can mean different things as you go along.
I mean, there's nothing more Oulipian than following a preordained plan.
Right.
That's you got to have the maze to get the cheese. Okay, so our last question, this is from Darlene. I hope I said your name correctly, Darlene or Darline. How long between writing your first novel and writing, thank you, sorry. How long between writing your first novel and writing your second novel, and what was the publishing experience difference?
I actually wrote a novel between Fog and Car and my second novel, which was The Strangers, which was published in 2013. And I don't know how, I wrote another manuscript in between, but it wasn't working out. And so I threw it out, but I saved a portion of it. I cannibalized a portion of it and put it into that third manuscript. And so the next novel was The Strangers. It probably, I don't know, I worked on trying to get Fongar published for a long time, but but I don't know exactly how long it took to write The Strangers off the top of my head, but I would like to say 4 years or so. And that came out in 2013, so I probably started it in earnest maybe 2008, 2009. So after the publication of Fog and Car, in a way.
Okay. My cannibalize the manuscripts. Love it. My parting question to you, the softball I promised. I just wonder, is there any, you do have fans, and I wonder if there's any like one word, any little something you can dangle about the latest work. And then also I just wonder if you've read anything great lately that you can recommend for us. No prep. That would be a nice.
You didn't prep me for that one. the new novel, I'm finishing it up, and it has to do with some darker subjects like dementia and caretaking for dementia, as well as that kind of AI and character creation that I spoke about. But all of that, even though these are maybe somber themes or subjects of little seriousness, it is interwoven into, those two subjects are interwoven in a kind of in a space detective story, a detective story with the main character is called Space Detective. And there's also a mystery story involved. So it goes, that's all I have to say about that right now. But the book is called Space Bar, tentative title, and I'm almost done with it, or I'm finishing it up. And then what have I read recently? Well, at a conversation that I had in your backyard, Ian, with Anna and Violet. Anyways, two people who were big Chip Delaney, Samuel Delaney fans, and recommended Stars in My Pocket Like Grains of Sand. And I read that recently, and it's amazing to spend some time in Mr. Delaney's mind. And that book in particular, it's incredibly prescient. It foresees not only the internet, but it foresees, as you know, the gender non-duality, and because it deals with 6,000 worlds spread across the vastness of the universe, it talks about all kinds of cultural appropriation and cultural conflict.
And culture fugue.
And cultural
civilizational
yes.
death by culture fugue. I live for that. I adore that book.
So that's that. I'll throw that one out because I finished that recently.
Thank you so much. I feel if this is unless anybody has any urgent questions, maybe this is a good place to put down the mic.
Thank you, Ian. Thank you very much, and thank you, City Lights. Thank you to Peter.
Oh man, it's always a pleasure to have you in the house, Eugene Lim, and Ian. Such a great interlocutor. Thank you so much for doing the honors tonight. Looking forward to Space Bar and any of the additional work coming up in the future. Tonight's event has been made possible by support from the City Lights Foundation, continuing the legacy of our founder, the late Lawrence Ferlinghetti, through our public events, our publishing program, all intended to sustain a vibrant community of readers, writers, and critical thinkers. Be well, take care, be kind to each other. We hope to see you all again soon.
Thank you, Peter. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much. This was such a blast.